Aloha booktube and welcome to my channel. So nearly 2 years ago, I had made a video about the books that I brought with me to Hawaii. I had moved to the islands 2 years ago, and I feel as if that journey, although it only lasted 1 year, it felt like 5. I suppose that warrants a video in itself. I can be incredibly long-winded and I do not want to keep this introduction too long. Now, I had actually accumulated a lot more books. However, when I was moving back to the US mainland, I was not able to bring all of them back with me. I believe 80% of the portion of my belongings that I shipped back to the mainland were books. It was a bit excessive. Yeah, it was an incredible experience, and I find a lot of my journey reflected in the nature of these books. My intention for this video is to serve as an expression of gratitude for the journey that I had had for the 1 year that I had lived in Honolulu. I'd like to say mahalo nui to everyone who had any sort of impact on my journey, whether it was before, during, and after. So with that said, I am breaking this video into 3 segments. The first segment will be books that I bought, which honestly was only a handful. The second segment is I met the author. That's pretty self-explanatory. It is people who I had met along my journey who had written a book and it had ended up in my hands. And then the third segment of this video is it fell into my lap, whether it's something I just found or it was gifted to me. So with that said, let's get into it. When I had moved to Oahu, one of the very first adventures that I had given myself was to take a bus up into the mountains, and on top of a mountain there is a replica of a Buddhist temple where I had purchased the teaching of Buddha. I will link the information about the temple in the description box below if you ever find yourself on the island. I had purchased Manifesting Your Magical Life by Radleigh Valentine at my place of employment, the metaphysical shop that I had worked at. It is all about the different angels that you can use to incorporate pockets of magic into your daily life and how to take smaller steps into manifesting the life that you wish to have. I really enjoyed this book because it's one that you can flip through and find a lot of nuggets of wisdom in it. If you are familiar with Radleigh Valentine, they make oracle cards and tarot cards also, I believe, and I am obsessed with the cover. The book that I am most excited about that I had purchased in Hawaii was from my favorite bookstore called Skullface. It sits in Chinatown, which, if you're familiar with Chinatown, it has an energy in itself. Skullface somehow fits right into it. It is a very gothic and rock and roll kind of bookstore. The owner had told me that he believes the space is haunted. So if you like a good haunt, then you should definitely go to the bookstore or Chinatown in general. I have lots of stories about that, but for another day. I had purchased Hunting the Killer Idea by McFarlane. This book compares creativity to the process of hunting and how to track, hunt, and execute your creative ideas. And the inside of this book is incredible. So I'm just going to show you a few quick bits of it. This is the inside jacket. It's very rock and roll, and it is aggressive in the context of you have to be aggressive with any art that you make. So I absolutely love this book, hands down. I've read a lot of books about creativity, which I love, but this is different. This registers a little bit differently than the other books do in my brain. As I had mentioned earlier within this video, I had the great honor and privilege to work alongside many different kinds of healers on the island, one of which is Sirena Pendragon. She wrote Led by Spirit. What's really cool is she actually designed the cover of this book herself. This book is Serena's account of her near-death experience and a recollection of different events in her life that have impacted the different centers of her chakra systems. So you'll find that it is almost like a journal entry type of book based on the different chakra systems. So it is very beautiful and very healing and a roller coaster, but in a really good way. I cannot say enough about this book. I read it in one sitting, and if you find yourself a spiritual being, then I would highly recommend looking into Serena's book. I feel particularly giddy about this book because it came from one of my volunteers. We had discussed how I worked in a metaphysical shop, and the next day he came with this book under his arm and he had gifted it to me. And that book is The Gift ESP, The Extraordinary Experiences of Ordinary People by Dr. Sally Rhine Feather and Michael Schmicker, who was my volunteer. And I'm so touched. Michael was an incredible human being, and I looked forward to working with him every week. I am going to read to you just a little bit on the inside of the jacket what this is about. A trained parapsychologist as well as a psychologist, Dr. Feather uses the stories of more than 200 people who have experienced ESP to explain what it is and how it operates through dreams, intuition, and visual and auditory hallucinations. She explains the compelling scientific evidence for the reality of ESP, covering the research on precognition, clairvoyance, and telepathy from more than 50 years of laboratory experiments. So if you find yourself to be one of the spiritual type, or you operate from your intuition, or you yourself consider yourself to be an ESP, then I would highly recommend this book by Michael Schmicker. And he also writes other books. They are available on Amazon. I had met the next author several times. We shared a mutual friend and sometimes found ourselves in the same place at the same time. At the time, she was a PhD student in creative writing, and that was Amanda Galvan, who, I'm sorry, Amanda, if I did not say your last name correctly. The title of her first published work of poetry is Where My Umbilical is Buried, and it reflects on her relationship with her mother. The back of the book says, "Where my umbilical is buried is a threshold for acceptance and healing." Galvan Huynh discovers what it means to be a daughter of a grieving mother orphaned at 16 and the ways trauma passed down to the next generation. This is an author I know with absolute certainty that we need to look out for in the future. I was gifted this book, Lighter, by Young Pueblo for my birthday. He is a young man from Ecuador who is on a spiritual journey of his own, and in this particular book, he touches on a radically compassionate plan for turning inward and lifting the heaviness that prevents us from healing ourselves and the world. So the next two are for my SJM girlies. My best friend who got me hooked on SJM had decided that I need to read the Throne of Glass series. And so I had started reading it while I was on the island. She sent me her own personal copies of the books, and a few of them got damaged in transit. So I ended up hanging on to these copies. Very generous thank you to my best friend. So I have here Heir of Fire and Empire of Storms. This one has seen better days, but it went across the ocean and it came back, and then it, back and forth. So it has seen a journey. So I am actually, this is the only series that I'm still working through with SJM. I had finished A Court of Thorns and Roses pretty quickly, and then I have finished all of Crescent City so far, and I'm still working on Throne of Glass. I am currently reading Queen of Shadows, so I only have a few books left. No spoilers, please and thank you. And of course, I'd love to thank Haley for sending me your book babies and getting me back on the reading train, as you always do. The next two books I had received from my employer at the metaphysical shop. She really had a lot of passion about her work and curating this group of healers. I was recommended this book, Sylvia Browne's God, Creation, and Tools for Life. If the word God does not resonate with you, I recommend trying a different word. Source, Goddess, Universe. I think the message is all the same regardless of what word you use here. So this is Sylvia Browne's first book in the Journey of the Soul series. And as I had said, my boss had asked me to read it. I did not read it. But I wholly intend to get to it because I feel like the right resources will fall into our lap when we need to read it the most. My boss and a lot of my coworkers were Sylvia Browne stans. I am honestly not familiar with her work enough to make a judgment on that yet, but I'm glad to have this tool in my toolbox for when I'm ready for it. And the next book was also gifted to me by my employer, and that is Earth Palladian Keys to the Living Library by Barbara Marciniak. Sorry, Barbara. So this book is based on the Palladian star system, and it is supposed to hold the energetic codes and keys for those who feel aligned with the Palladian star system. The back of this one says, "This is the handbook to inspired living, calling on us to restore and return value to the human being and to recognize the goddess energies and the power of blood as connections to our DNA and our heritage." If you subscribe to this school of belief about galactic beings, then this book may very well interest you. This book in particular, I was very surprised to find it. I had a library in my condo building. This book in particular was sitting in the free books, please take section rather than in the actual library section. And it is the Hidden Messages in Water by Masuru Emoto. If there's anything you should know about me personally, I'm a water person through and through. I want to spend all my time in the water, all of my time in the ocean. That is where I feel most myself. So I actually had heard about this book a few weeks prior to my finding it. I'm very excited about having this just fall into my lap as it did. The final two books are very sentimental to me because they were gifted to me by a friend that I had on the island. She had given me one for the woman I was becoming, and the second one was for my inner child. And so the one for the woman I was becoming is Anatomy of the Spirit by Caroline Myss. And this book synthesizes the ancient wisdom of three spiritual traditions, the Hindu chakras, the Christian sacraments, and the Kabbalist tree of life, to demonstrate the 7 stages through which everyone must pass in the search for higher consciousness and spiritual maturity. The woman who had given this to me really had a lot of high praise for this book. And the other book she had given me for my inner child was the Velveteen Rabbit, which is a children's book. It is by Margery Williams, and this was my first time ever reading this book. This was not read to me as a child. I had heard of it, but it had never crossed my path. The quote that really stood out to me is probably the most common one, but it is, "Once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always." And so I had read this as soon as she had given it to me, as I was turning 30 and going through a lot of transitions in my life. And her birthday was a few weeks after mine, so I actually had made a drawing for her based on this book and framed it for her as her birthday gift. So I was very touched because how often do we receive children's books in our adult years? These books cannot even begin to emulate the journey and the experience that I had. I am so grateful that I was able to bring these books back with me as a sort of time capsule for my experience on the island. Thank you very much for being here, BookTube. I am so incredibly grateful for you. Happy reading.